Hi, I'm James Lamont, Director of the Vidine Center for Rural Economic Development at the University of Minnesota, Crookston. I would like to welcome you to the Food Supply Chain series, where we are educating people on what happened during COVID-19 to various sectors within agriculture, what innovative solutions were deployed as a result of the crisis, and where the industry is heading as a whole. Today we have two special guests in the egg industry, Mike Senser, Senior Vice President of Hidden Villa Ranch in California, and Oscar Garrison, Senior Vice President of the United Egg Producers. I'd like to welcome you both. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and start with Mike of Hidden Villa Ranch. Would you please provide a brief introduction of you, the business that you work for, and kind of talk through what it's been like?
Hidden Villa Ranch Nest Fresh is a fully integrated producer, packer, and marketer of eggs. And we have locations throughout the United States, actually 10 or 12 locations, and we are now presently building a new location in Hawaii.
Excellent. And how long have you been there?
I've been here almost, I think I'm just about 33 years.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Oscar, same with you. As an industry representative, more or less, can you talk a little bit about you, the business you represent, your producers that you represent?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So United Egg Producers, we are a Capper-Volstead farmer cooperative, not necessarily a trade association. Most people look at us as a trade association, but we're actually a farmer cooperative. Within that, we function a lot as a trade association. We represent approximately 90% of the U.S. egg-laying industry out there, with around 300 million hens, give or take, probably a few less right now based on what we went through with COVID. In addition, I also represent UEA Further Processors, and that's United Egg Association, and that's our liquid egg guys, our dried egg guys, the ones that produce further processed egg products. They were the ones that were really devastated throughout this entire event. I'm the Senior Vice President of Food Safety Regulatory Affairs with UEP. I've been here 8 years. Prior to that, I had a very long career, over 20 years as a regulator in the state of Georgia, and was also the president of the Association of Food and Drug Officials of the United States.
Thank you, Oscar. Well, you mentioned something about those that were impacted. So, Oscar, could you tell me how, as a whole, COVID-19 impacted your industry?
Yeah, it was devastating to our industry. Very early on, we saw the impacts coming. We started seeing pockets of what was being portrayed as egg shortages out there within the marketplace. And realistically, as the restaurant business dried up, particularly in the areas that were hit very early on with the virus, in those areas, all the people who would normally eat out were then focused on purchasing retail product from the grocery stores. And that transition and, moving those products back and forth is not as simple as it may seem just on the face of things. Eggs for egg products can be produced differently than eggs for the table egg industry. Those are regulated under the FDA egg safety rule, which requires environmental testing and other things. Because the egg products go through a 5-log pasteurization step and essentially are a ready-to-eat product at that point in time, those eggs can be produced differently, but they can't simply move from the food service side and not be broke and sold in the shell. So it was very challenging.
And Michael, that was an industry perspective. With respect to Hidden Villa, Nest Fresh Eggs, what did you experience from a company perspective?
Well, the rough numbers are 60% retail and 40% food service. And what happened was, as Oscar just explained, is that at least 30% of that 40% food service demand ended up in the retail stores. And we couldn't keep the shelves full because that 40% of eggs was not set up, even if they were acceptable for the shell egg market. Those packers or producers that had those eggs weren't set up to pack them in a retail package. So it took us about a month and a half to get an adequate supply of those eggs into our processing plants and out to the retailer. So I would say it took us about 6 weeks to fill our customer shelves.
Wow.
And as we saw these, our members in this situation, UEP had to act. We're an organization that acts on behalf of our members. So we immediately petitioned FDA and USDA Agricultural Marketing Service to make some concessions and flexibilities there to sell eggs in retail cartons, even in some cases just on flats without labels. And the regulatory agencies were very accommodating, working with FDA within the egg safety rule to see which eggs could be moved over, and then repositioning those food service shell eggs. We had large food service companies out there that had a 2-week supply of shell eggs that were essentially sitting in a warehouse, and those eggs had nowhere to go because the restaurants were closed down at that point in time. So then USDA agreed to actually bring those eggs back into the plant where they were processed, reprocess, regrade those, and actually put those in retail cartons. Now, at the end of the day, then we hit another problem, and it's just a series of events. But then a carton shortage appears out of nowhere, where the carton producers just can't produce enough cartons because they're used to 40% of the eggs going into food service, and those are 15 dozen cases, 30 dozen cases, whatever they may be. They aren't labeled for the individual customers and consumers in grocery stores.
Thank you. That's highly insightful. So, Oscar, given that there's a rapid transition, what do you think the biggest opportunities and threats are as a result of the virus? Obviously, there were some speed bumps. Industry immediately innovated around that to try to mitigate that through some of the concessions that were made in your leadership. But moving forward, are there still threats to the industry? Are there opportunities that maybe the industry didn't consider before as a result of COVID-19? Or what's your perspective on that?
From that standpoint, one of the biggest threats that we had again was, dealing with the movement of those eggs around and where they were going. And realistically, the food service operations still aren't back at 100%. Some of the schools aren't back in. The schools are a big consumer of eggs every day. Through the purchasing program that the federal government has, there's a lot of eggs that are bought and provided to those children so they can at least have one nutritious meal per day at the school that they're attending. And, when we saw that dry up, there was actually birds that had to be removed or taken out, of production at that point in time because there was just no home for those eggs to move to. Now, the guys on the retail side, they did see some opportunities there very early on. But again, once the hoarding and the panic buying kind of subsided, things went back to normal a bit, but then it was the waves that it would come in. It wasn't like the whole country was inundated at one point in time. You would have hot spots of where, as the country tried to open back up, there were restaurants that were beginning to open, but then all of a sudden they would hit a point and they would shut back down. And again, that consumption would just go away in those channels. So just balancing the logistics and the moving of those eggs, I think, was one of our biggest threats and opportunities throughout the entire thing, and keeping our members up to date and involved.
So you mentioned there's for some major increases in terms of retail. So Michael, how did Hidden Villa respond? And did your company experience that benefit?
Yeah, we had that in most of our business was retail. So yes, our sales picked up 30-40% that first month or two. It's now settled down to about a 20% clip increase. But we geared up. I mean, we put second shifts on our plants. We've been running our plants now 7 days a week to fill the pipeline, and we're just barely keeping ahead of it.
So the virus impacted operations and that you had to increase capacity. So did the egg industry experience anything akin to maybe what the meat industry experienced? Not far from me is Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where they had a major outbreak, and then further south into Nebraska and Iowa, you saw some similar ones with some of the meat packing facilities. Did the egg industry experience that as well, or?
We did. We did in various plants where we would lose people. We encouraged our people that if they felt they were sick, not to come in, but to go get a test and stay home, and we'll pay them so they wouldn't infect everybody else. Our packing lines are not quite, I think, as concentrated as the meat packing plants. And of course, our plants are not as big as those big meat packing plants, but still our people work side by side. So if somebody was sick, then we had a number of infected people. And it continues. We have 3 out in Pennsylvania today. So it's been waves. Denver, Pennsylvania, Texas, California. We've had some waves where a group would call in, and we would have to alter our schedules and stuff for them. So.
Well, thank you for that perspective, Mike. Oscar, from an industry perspective, kind of a similar trend, I imagine, or?
Yeah, it was a very similar trend. We saw, some companies were more impacted than others were out there, just depending upon the location and how their business model may be set up there. But, just keeping the information flowing to the members, we actually very early on set up a resource page and started updating that and pushing that information out. What we learned during High Path AI back in 2015 was, these producers, they need the ability to have the information that they need at their fingertips. And, although we're available for calls and one-on-ones and, to get them what they need on a day in, day out basis, when we set up this COVID resource library there and was able to update it with the latest from OSHA, the latest from CDC, recommendations from FDA and FSIS and all of those various governmental agencies, it really gave them a, one-stop shop to go to when they had questions, when they needed resources, to pull those back in and actually utilize to adjust the operationalism of their plants and their farms throughout the process.
Thank you. Last question, I guess, pertains to innovation. So initially, the federal regulatory entities were kind enough to make some concessions so that you can meet demand. And there were some packaging alterations almost immediately. But moving forward, what innovation lessons, and I'll start with, I guess, Mike on this, what innovative lessons would you like to share with those that watch this in terms of how Hidden Villa reacted and kind of what folks can learn from that moving forward?
I would just say that we were very, very proactive. We bought trailer loads of masks and sanitary, what do they call that stuff for your hands, the gels, and when we just spent an enormous amount of money supplying our plants with all that stuff, because the plant people just didn't have time to even find it. It wasn't on the regular shelves; it was all gone. So we at corporate did most of that for the plants, and I think because we were so proactive as far as coaching people, explaining to them that why they were wearing a mask. Most people didn't know what the mask was for. They thought most people thought the mask was to protect themselves, whereas it was really to protect the people around you. And a lot of people didn't know that. And a lot of people didn't even know how to wear the darn mask. So, there's a lot of education to go into plant personnel and stuff, both English and Spanish. And we did a lot of that.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I was one of those people for the first week. I didn't know it, but I was wearing my mask incorrectly. So I completely understand, not being in the medical industry, why someone would struggle with that.
My wife is a retired registered nurse, and it just drives her crazy where she'll go to a market and she'll watch the clerk before they wait on her. They'll use sanitary spray, and they'll spray the area from the last customer. And they have gloves on, and then the lady calls her to the register with the same gloves that she just used for the customer before, and with all the sanitary wiping and stuff. And she starts to handle my wife, and my wife says, "No, you need to take those gloves off now and put on a new pair." And they look at her like, excuse me, you know, what are you talking about? They have no idea.
Sure.
And other people will use the gloves and they'll give the money, they'll give the change, and then they'll go right and handle the food for the next customer. People don't know what the purposes are of the mask and the gloves.
Right, and that transcends industries across the board, and we got a lot of learning to do in that space.
We all do. Yeah.
Yes, we do. We do. Oscar, from an innovative perspective, industry-wide, what would you like to share with the group?
You know, information sharing is always key to keeping your members informed, you know, providing them with the tools and resources that they need to move forward and to continue addressing the challenges in a pandemic situation or really in any type of emergency situation like this. So, you know, you need to have a way to disseminate that information and get it to the folks in real world time so it's very useful to these companies and also be able to interpret that. One of the other things that, you know, as a former regulator and work in emergency management is you need to know your regulatory partners and your government entities that you work with day in and day out. You know, whether it's your state vet, whether it is FDA, whether it's USDA, whether it is the State Department of Agriculture, during an event like this is no time to try to make friends and do introductions. And again, you need to be involved in associations and other things like the Association of Food and Drug Officials, you know, the Food Safety Summit, many things like that to meet these people, you know, exchange information, you know, form a bond there. So when you need them, you know how to get in touch with them. As we saw people flock away from large office settings and working remotely, you know, when we would be working with the government, whether it was Department of Homeland Security on confirming that eggs and other companies are essential businesses or whatever that may be, you know, a lot of times you were reaching these folks at home. And you know, the phones will be forwarded, but again, having that ability to know that person that you're reaching out to and that previous relationship is paramount to an association or a farmer cooperative like ours, and being able to effectively do our job when things are vastly different than they are day to day.
Well, Oscar, Michael, I'd like to thank you both. Two senior executives within the industry that transcend the entire country with decades of experience. Thank you for sharing your experience, your thoughts, and how the industry is going to move forward. And I'd like to thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
You bet. Join us next time for our dairy series. Look forward to that. That should be released shortly after this. And I would like to thank the panelists again. Again, this is James Lamont, Director of the Vidine Center for Rural Economic Development at the University of Minnesota Crookston. And this is the Food Supply Chain series focused on eggs. Thank you so much.